Hi, welcome to Stitch Back Stories. I'm Michelle, and today I'm going to show you how to digitize these simple Christmas designs. Yesterday I shared how I made these Trader Joe's inspired tote bags, and these are the designs I embroidered on them. I'm working in Embroidery's Stitch Artist Level 2, and I'm going to start by going into Create mode and bringing in my first image. Let's start with the Santa hat. This one is pretty simple. And if you don't see your image, just make sure this picture frame is selected so that you're showing it. I'm going to select my design and go to select mode and make sure the design is the exact size I want it to be. And I want all of my designs to be about 1 inch on the shorter side. So I'm going to update that here. And then I'm going to go back to millimeters while I'm digitizing, and then go back to create mode, and we're ready to digitize this. I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard to zoom in. I like to be at 600% because that means each of these boxes we see is 1 millimeter. And then I'm going to go ahead and start with the first shape, this big red part. So I'm going to draw with points and then select fill stitch, and I'll go ahead and pick my color. It doesn't really matter where we start because this is a very simple shape, so you can start anywhere and start clicking around to trace the shape. Once I get to the corner, I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard to make that sharp edge, and then we're just going to keep going. Here at the pom-pom, I'm going to overlap a little because we don't want a gap. Again, holding Control around the corners to get that sharp edge. I don't really trace exactly around this shape because I want to think about pull compensation. Embroidery moves and pulls on the fabric as it sews, so it's good to give a little bit of space. And as you can see, the shape is looking pretty wonky, but we're going to go ahead and fix it. So once I get to the end, I'm going to right click to close. I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard to zoom out so I could see it at 100%. So you can tell that even though we weren't tracing it very closely, it doesn't really matter. But anyways, I'm going to go in, press 6 on my keyboard again, and clean up some of these nodes. I like to double click on a node to get rid of it if we have any extras. But again, this doesn't really matter too much. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to select this image, and we have this bar that goes across with the 2 yellow nodes on the side that determines the direction your stitches are going. So horizontal is pretty standard. Because I have this hat at sort of an angle, I'm just going to go ahead and make the stitch direction follow that angle. And then I'm going to go over to the right for the settings. For the density, I'm going to bring it up a little bit to 4.5. I just like to use as little thread as possible while keeping a good quality design. And for the length, I'm going to bring it up a little bit to 4 millimeters. And then we're going to go to the underlay section, which is this third box here. I'm going to keep the contour and perpendicular, and I like to increase the density to something high like 32. So we're going to have a little bit less underlay. This design is very small, so it doesn't need a lot of underlay. Okay, now we're going to go to the pom-pom. Again, super simple. I'm going to draw with points, go to fill stitch, and I'm just going to go around the circle. And I'm keeping my shape slightly outside the design because I'm thinking about my pull compensation. I'm going to right click to close. I'm going to change the color to a creamy white color. And the stitch direction doesn't matter too much here. It is a very small shape. I'm just going to go ahead and do it at an angle again because that's just the way the hat is leaning. And then again, for this bottom part of the hat, I'm just going to go with a fill stitch. So it doesn't really matter where we start. I'm going to make sure to overlap with that red shape because I don't want to have any gaps. And then I'm going to hold Control when I go around the corner. If I wanted the corner to be round and I don't want this sharp point like this, I could just right click on the node and change it to a curve, and then we could adjust it from there so we get a nice rounded corner. And you could also delete nodes if they get in the way. I find that when I'm digitizing and I'm tracing a shape, I end up adding a bunch of extra nodes, and then I'll go in after and delete them. You can pull on these little tabs to adjust the shape as you like. Okay, I'm going to zoom out to see what my shape looks like. And again, you can change the direction of your stitches to however you want. All right, this one was super easy. I'm going to go ahead and export that working file. And then I'm going to export the stitch file. And now I'm going to create a new page for my next design. Again, we're going back to image to bring in our second image. Let's go with the candy cane. I'm going to select the image, go to select mode, again go back to inches, and I'm going to adjust the size to what I want it to be. Then go back to millimeters for digitizing in create mode. I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard to zoom in, and for this I think what I'm going to do is start with a fill stitch for the red. That would be my bottom of the candy cane. So I'm going to draw with points, go to fill, select my color, and I'm going to go back to that red. And I'm just going to go around this candy cane shape. Again, I'm not that worried about it being perfect. Right click to close, and any wonky edges I'm going to fix. You can zoom out to see how it looks like. And then I'm going to change the stitch direction. Again, I have the candy cane sort of at an angle, so I think I'm going to do the same. You can see here when I change the stitch direction, it looks like we got some bit of a wonky stitch going across. And so when you see that, just move either your stitch direction or your start and end points until it's no longer there. Again, I'm going to double check my stitch settings. I think I'm going to leave it the same that I had the Santa hat. And now we're going to go in and do the white parts of the candy cane. And for this, I'm going to go with a satin column stitch. So we're going to select the satin column here, and then we're going to draw in the stripes. And so drawing the stripes for the satin column is a little weird. You're supposed to go across. So I'm going to start at one point, and I'm going to go across, and then the next point, go across. The next point, go across. Right click to close. I'm going to go to the color and make sure I have that white creamy color. And then I'm just going to adjust this shape and the stitch direction points so that it matches the red. For this satin column stitch, when it sews out, it's going to push out on the ends a little bit. So I'm going to bring it a little bit in from the red shape, and then let's make sure we have that curve. Same thing here. I'm going to bring it in slightly. And then these are stitch directions. You just want to make sure that they follow along the stripe. So I know that looks a little bit wonky, but when I zoom out, it looks better. And I will be doing a test stitch to make sure that this looks how I want it to be. For the start and end points, if I put the end point here, and I do the next one starting here, you'll likely just get a connecting stitch. I don't really like how that looks like, so I'm going to make sure I get a jump stitch out of this. And so I'm going to move the end point of this shape back here, and then we could start the next one a little bit further away. But same dealio with the stripe. We're just going to draw all of them in using this satin column stitch and adjusting it so it follows the shape of a candy cane. And I'm moving my start and end points. So you can see that red line that goes across that's showing that I have a jump stitch. And I'm just gonna do the same for all the other white stripes. I did realize I forgot to check the setting of the white satin column stitch before I was finishing all the stripes. So I'm going to go check that now. I pretty much leaving the density. For the underlay, it looks like it has an edge run and parallel, so it'll do the outside shape and then it'll go and do in one round across before sewing the final layer. I think that's fine. If you find that it's not dense enough and you're seeing the red through after your stitch out, you can also add the zigzag. But I'm going to start with this, see how that works in the test stitch. Alright, the candy cane is done, so I'm going to go ahead and export the working file. And then I'm going to export the stitch file. And I'm going to create a new page for the next design. Selecting image. Let's go with the gingerbread. Again, select the design, go to select mode, and I'm going to make him about 1 inch. Go back to millimeters and then back to create mode. We're going to start with the base of the cookie with the fill stitch, and it's the same thing we've been doing. We are going to trace the shape all the way around. Right click to close, and then we're gonna change the color. Press OK. We see that we have this wonky stitch here, so I'm going to move my start and end points until we get rid of it. So that was pretty easy. If you've seen my other digitizing videos, you know I put a lot more emphasis on the push and pull compensation, and we're a little bit more cautious about like where we're drawing these stitches. And so if this was a much bigger shape, I would be thinking about the pull compensation and being very conscious about how much room I'm giving this shape. But because this design is only an inch big, we're not really gonna see much of a difference, and I'm not too worried about it. With the base of the gingerbread done, I'm gonna go in and fill in his little icing. And because the shape is so small, again, I'm not gonna use any fill stitches. I'm going to use the satin stitch for all the details on the gingerbread. So starting with this eyeball, I'm gonna go across, right click to close. I'm gonna change the color to my white, and then adjust the shape so that it looks like a circle. And I'm going to move the end point a little bit further so that I get kind of a bigger jump stitch. It'll be easier to cut. I'm going to select this circle, just double checking the underlay. I think that's fine. I'm going to copy and paste and bring over the second eyeball. And then we'll draw his smile, again going back to that satin column and following that curve. Right click to close, and then I'm going to adjust it to give it that round end. The shape is so small, I don't think we need all these stitch direction markers, so I'm going to get rid of one of them. And the start and end point doesn't matter too much here. Okay, for the gumdrops, again, I'm going to select this eyeball, I'm going to copy and paste it, I'm going to bring it down, and then I'm just going to make it a little bigger. And then I'm going to take this gumdrop, realizing my shape is a little bit wonky, I'm going to adjust it a little. Okay, I'm going to take this gumdrop, I'm going to copy and paste it and bring it down. Looking good, and then we'll go ahead and make all of the details on his limbs. Just a satin column stitch is pretty simple. Alright, now Gingy is done. If your machine doesn't cut jump stitches automatically, you do want to sort of think about the order that all of these are stitching. So I'd probably start with like the eyeballs in the mouth, and then go around limb by limb, and then go into the middle so that your jump stitches will kind of be along the outside and not going across everywhere. But if I press space and I click and hold, I can see where all those jump stitches are. Alright, our little gingerbread is done. I'm going to export the working file and export the stitch file and move on to the next design. Alright, for the Christmas tree, this one's pretty simple. I'm going to start with the tree trunk with a satin stitch. You could also do a fill stitch, it doesn't really matter too much. And I'm going to start a little bit above because we want the shapes to overlap so that we don't have any gap. I'm going to right click to close, and then I'm going to update the color. Press OK. And our settings should be fine because it'll be the same as what we've had for our other designs. I'm gonna get rid of some of these nodes. I'm gonna bring the end point inside. It doesn't really matter, but this area is gonna be overlapped by the tree, so I feel like it secures the end point a little bit better than if it was out in the open over here, but it doesn't matter too much. All right, I'm gonna use a fill stitch for the tree, draw with points, fill, and I'm just gonna go ahead and trace this tree. Ignore that really wonky area, I'm not too worried about it. I'm just gonna go back and fix it once I finish my shape. Okay, I'm gonna change the color. And let's fix this wonky shape. This is just how I like to digitize. I like to finish my shape as quick as possible, and then I will go back in and, oops. And then I will go back in and fix things. By all means, if you want to take your time as you're initially creating that shape, instead of having to go back in after to make sure everything looks good, go for it. Alright, I'm going to zoom out to see how this tree looks like. And then you can play around with the stitch direction and see how you like it. I think I'm just going to go with a simple horizontal. And looks like this shape is still a little bit wonky. Alright, that's a nice little ugly tree, but it's okay. The design's gonna be small and it's gonna be cute. And now I'm gonna do the star. And for this, you could do a fill stitch and trace around it, but it is very small, so I think I'm just gonna do 5 satin column stitches. So I'm gonna draw each little leg of the star. I'm gonna change the color. And I'm just gonna make sure the end point is on the inside so that we don't have any jump stitches, and then after it stitches out each little leg, it'll just go directly into the next one. So this one's first, it doesn't matter where it starts, but end it here. Make sure the next one starts where the first one ended, and then we'll do that for all of them. So I'm gonna move this one here, and it's gonna start where the previous one ended. And then it doesn't really matter where the last one ends. So we'll see how that stitches out on the embroidery machine. If I feel like it's too dense and there's too much going on in the center, I will come back and edit my digitizing and just change it to a fill stitch. But our Christmas tree is done, so I'm gonna go ahead and save this working file and save the stitch file. Okay, moving on to the Christmas stocking. I already went ahead and made it the size that I want it to be. I'm gonna start with the red loop on the top with a satin column stitch. Just gonna go around and follow that shape. Right click to close. I'm gonna change the color to my red. And then we're going to clean it up. To avoid a jump stitch, I'm going to pick where this shape ends, and then I'm going to draw with points and then just do a run stitch. And then I'm going to click across until I get to this red shape, and then I'm going to do a fill stitch for this red shape. And this run stitch will be covered by the white that we sew over it. Here at the toe part of the sock, I'm going to make sure we're overlapping the shapes just a bit. It looks like I have a weird line kind of sneaking in on the end here, so I'm going to play around with my start and end points and see if that fixes it, and looks like it did. And I'm going to zoom out a bit, and again, I'm going to move my stitch direction at an angle. I think it'll be cuter like that. And now we'll go in with the white designs. Change the color. You could change the color before or after, it's not a big deal. And then again, I'm overlapping these shapes so that there's no gap, and then I'm going to trace this white shape. Then I'm going to change the stitch direction to match the angle that this stocking is sitting at. And then finally, we'll do the toe with another fill stitch. Again, making sure these shapes overlap. Right click to close. I'm going to change the stitch direction. And our stocking is done. So simple, so easy. Let's go ahead and export that working file and export the stitch file. Next we have our present. I'm gonna go ahead and actually I think I'm fine with that size. I think I'm going to start with the green shape, so I'm going to do a fill stitch. Change the color. I'm just rounding the corners a little bit. And again, I'm going to change the stitch direction to match that angle of the present. For the ribbon, I'm gonna do a satin stitch, and I'm gonna start with this bottom part and just draw that straight line. And I'm gonna make sure it ends up where this ribbon is. Just bring this in a little bit. And then the ribbon, I'm gonna do another satin column stitch, and I'm just going to do 2 loops. So I'll start with this first one. And I'll have it overlap a little bit. And then I'll do that second one. And I just want to make sure the second one starts where the first one ends. So I'll bring this start point over to where this one ends. And just clean up these nodes. You can see here, this stitch direction accidentally locked into the other part of the shape. So I'm just going to bring it over and make sure it's not doing that. Delete some extra nodes. And I think I'm happy with that. Now I have 2 little stars on this Christmas present. So I'm going to go to our tree. And we're going to click the first part of the star, hold shift, click that last part of the star, I'm gonna copy, bring it over to my present and paste. I'm gonna zoom in a bit and bring it down. And then I'm going to paste one more, bring it over, and I'm gonna rotate this one. And I can see actually, it looks like there's a bit of a gap, so I'm going to bring some of those shapes up and close that gap. I didn't notice this earlier when I was doing the Christmas tree, so I'm actually gonna go back to the Christmas tree and make sure that we close the gap on here as well. So I'm going to re-export that working file and that stitch file for the tree. Okay, back to the present. See that we have like a little mistake here with that extra stitch. So I'm going to just adjust until it's gone. Okay, it looks like that worked. And I'm just gonna make some small adjustments to the design. I see that the star is kind of hitting the ribbon. I'm not worried about my design looking exactly like my sketches. And I see that the present is kind of sneaking out under the ribbon, so I'm just going to adjust that. I'm going to export the working file first, and then export the stitch file. For the final design, we have our little reindeer. I'm going to adjust the size. It's at 1 1/16". I think I'm happy with that. I'm gonna go to millimeter and back to create mode. There's a few different ways you could tackle this reindeer. You can do a bunch of satin stitches. So I would start with the legs and do tail, fill the body, and then do the head, the ears, and the antlers. I'm just gonna do a fill stitch and go all the way around. I want to really exaggerate these small pieces because we don't want them to get lost. Right click to close, change the color, you know the drill. And go ahead and adjust that shape. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to play around with the stitch direction again. I think I want to go at an angle because I want to get as many of those stitches in like uninterrupted as possible, because there's just like a lot of little limbs and moving parts here. So just kind of play around with the stitch direction until I'm happy with it. And I'm going to make this one slightly more dense because I want to make sure all these little details get included. It looks like we have a little bit of a weird stitch here, so I'm going to adjust until that's fixed. Sometimes you just need to move the start and end points. Okay, and then we'll go in and do the small details. I'm just gonna go back to the gingerbread. Let's grab his little eyeballs. We're gonna copy, paste it on here, change the color to black. Let's make a little adjustment if you need to. Copy the eyeball, paste it for the second eyeball. I'm going to paste it again for the nose, make it slightly bigger. I'm going to change that color to red. I'm going to move the stitch direction just because. And then we'll do the scarf in the satin column stitch. So we're going to go across. Actually, I'm going to start with these parts. You always want to start with the bottom shape first. Change the color. Make the next shape. And then we'll make sure the second shape starts where the first one ends so that we can avoid a jump stitch. And then we'll make this a last shape. And again, we'll have it start where that previous shape ends. Make final adjustments. And our reindeer is done. So here's all of our designs and how they look together. I'm actually noticing the candy cane and the tree is a little bit smaller than the others, and the Santa hat is like a little bit big. So I'm gonna go back and just make these tiny adjustments. I'm going to shrink my Santa hat ever so slightly, and then I'm going to center it. And then if you do shrink or move anything around, just make sure to zoom in and go back in and make sure nothing looks crazy. And then I'm going to re-export that. Alright, so these are looking good, and now I'm going to test them all in my machine in case I need to make any changes before sewing these onto my final product. Alright, last but not least, we're going to digitize the center part of the bag, and I just created this lockup that says Holly Jolly, and this entire thing is going to be satin column stitches. So I already have this set to the size that I want. I'm in create mode. I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard, and we're going to go in and just create these satin columns for every single letter. So I'm selecting the satin column, and then I'm just going to go across following the shape of the letters. Right click to close, adjust the stitch direction, and I'm going to update the color. I think my settings are good as is for density with a parallel underlay. And I'm gonna make sure this shape ends where the next one starts. Pretty simple. I can copy and paste this other part of the H, although it looks like it's a little bit thinner on this side, so we'll adjust. And again, making sure the start and end points line up. And for this shape, we just go all the way around. Then go into the L. Get rid of some of these extra stitch direction nodes, whatever they're called. Lots of extra stitches here. I'm going to get rid of some. And we have 2 L's, so we can just go ahead and copy and paste. And then we'll go into the Y. This one's a bit of an interesting shape. I think I'm gonna do this left side first. And we'll like kind of wrap it around like that. Oh wait, I didn't mean to go that far across. We'll end it here. And then bring this one up actually, so we get that loop part. Yeah, I like that. And then I'll do this right side of the shape. By the way, this bottom part I'm realizing is like 7 boxes or millimeters across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's probably the absolute most I would go for a satin column stitch. So really want to make sure these shapes overlap. Actually, what I'm going to do to avoid the satin column stitch from being so long, I'm going to change the direction slightly towards this bottom. So we'll kind of like gradually let the direction of the shape turn. I'm going to move the end stitch to this corner because it's starting to look a little bit wonky. I'm going to add an extra node there to make sure we get all those stitches. Making sure this overlaps. I think same thing here. I'm going to change the stitch direction just slightly so that we go around and curve so that our stitches aren't too long. And if this Y ends up looking a little bit funky, I'll just come back and edit it. For the Y, I'm gonna add an extra zigzag underlay because these stitches are so long. You wanna make sure they're really secure. Okay, and then we'll do the J. Actually, now that I'm going back and looking and I'm realizing the H is also, these stitches are pretty big. So I'm gonna bring it in a little bit. And then I will add that extra underlay for this H shape as well. And then we'll do our J. The J is also really wide at the top, so I'm gonna first draw this shape out as is. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust it. And then we'll move this stitch direction as well. And so we'll kind of have this like gradual change in direction. I'm going to add a couple extra nodes there, or direction markers. I'm not really sure what they're called. Inclinations, that's what they're called. I haven't used that term in a while. I realize I've been calling them something wrong this whole video, but that's okay. Okay, so we have that shape sort of changing directions for the stitches. I think we're okay at this tip of the J. And then for ollie, we just get to copy and paste that whole part, which we love. And I'm just going to make sure everything stitches in order. So we have the H, O, L, L, Y, and the J, O, L, L, Y. Oh, and I realized for the Y, we need that second shape to start where that first one ended. So this one ended here. I want to make sure that second, want to make sure that second shape starts there. Okay, and now we'll do the border again, just satin column stitch, and I'm just going to trace this shape as is. Right click to close. Make sure our shape is nice and even and pretty. And we don't need the zigzag stitch here, we'll be fine. I'm gonna do the same for the bottom. Clean it up. I'm actually gonna move this inclination towards the end so that it's like gradually curving, and I'll do the same for that first shape. So I didn't do that earlier. All right, and we're all good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and export this working file and export the stitch file. Always do a test stitch when you're digitizing and make any adjustments that you need. Here are my final designs embroidered on this tote bag that I made. Thanks for watching!